property that has a commercial value. Right now we don't do that, so we can still sit at the table with them without having any kind of commercial property of which we hold. And believe us, they've asked us that question, do you take intellectual property? So right now, today, we do not. We hold no intellectual property, period. And that's the way we purposely write our contracts. And you know, the company does the heavy lifting. We sit at their joint steering committees and we give them scientific advice and patient perspective, but the companies of which we fund do the heavy lifting. They're the ones putting the research behind it, doing the research, putting it in the clinic, etc. So, other questions? Yes?
You made a comment at one point where I forget which area of research it was, but you said, we put a lot in there last year, so we
regeneration.
got it down. Okay.
Regeneration.
And it got me thinking, or the question I have is, what is your typical time frame when you're doing this? Because, like a mutual fund manager would never want to be evaluated on 1 year. They'd say 3, 5,
So
10.
typically, in research, you need to let it run its course about 3 years. So the regeneration program got stacked, put a lot of money there for regeneration of beta cells. And so now we want to see if any of that research pays off. So most of that funding was, and now we're actually cutting down how long we fund somebody for. It used to be 5 years. We don't do that anymore. I can tell you almost everything we're bringing through right now, and I'm even cutting that shorter because I want to see progress. Most of the regeneration programs got a 3-year length to it. And so what we want to see, what's the progress in the next 3 years coming after all that financing we did there? Are we making progress? Did we put the money on the right people? Are they making the progress they should be making, or do we need to fund somewhere else? So we'll be watching that portfolio very closely. That's run by Pat Killian, who is amazing. She is really amazing. So put a lot of investment there. Now we'll see in the next 3 years if it pays off. It's looking good. Some of our research now I'm forcing down to 2 years, and even some 1 year. So we just start funding contingencies. We'll fund 1 year. You show us good progress, we'll fund you. So we give them a contingency. We're going to fund you for up to 3 years, but the first year we're going to evaluate your progress, and if you didn't make progress, you may not get the next 2 years. And I like that because that makes them know that we're going to call them out on progress. So we've started doing more of that. But typically our grants are funded for 3 years when we fund. Typically. Yes?
Do you see staying involved with actually sitting down with the FDA and going and writing the pathways through that clinical trial that you talked about? Or is that something unusual that was done for the
Well, I look at it this way. We did it once, and they received it, and they're going to use it. There's a couple other areas in our research portfolio that probably need the same kind of effort, although I don't want to get in the practice of writing clinical guidance for the FDA. It's hard. It takes a lot of time. I don't want to have to do that, but they were very receptive. And I have to say, JDRF has an amazing relationship with the regulators in the U.S. We've just hired a consulting firm to come in and look at our regulatory efforts because I think they're going to be important for us. We don't want to be spending all this money in research and then get hung up with the regulators not getting these therapies to patients. So we just had an assessment done, and they're just finishing up. They've been working with us for the last 2 months, and one of the things that they did tell us that we weren't doing well is the regulation on the international front. So I think we have a tremendous relationship with the FDA in the U.S. I can't say that for the Europe, Australia, Canada. I don't think we've put enough energy there to develop that relationship, but what we're being told is we need to, particularly Europe. Because in some cases, we could get therapies out there sooner and then have a better chance to bring them to the U.S. So we need to start fostering our relationships with the European regulators, the Australian regulators. And why you should be excited about these 2 clinical trial networks we just launched is because now that we've got clinical trial networks down under in Australia, perhaps we could get therapies out there quicker through their regulators and then bring them to the U.S. Because the more patients you get taking therapies that are safe and effective, the more data you collect to take to the FDA and say, look. So it is something that, I'm going to be paying attention to of how we, and actually on my org chart, I am hiring a director in Europe for research. I don't think we've done enough work in Europe. I think there's tremendous research over there. We need to work with the regulators. So I actually am actively hiring a new director of research on the ground in Europe so that we can start fostering our relationship with the regulators as well as identifying any research opportunities that would be really exciting for us to take on. And it's really hard to do it stateside. So the cultures are different. I really need somebody on the ground in Europe, but this person will report directly into me out of National in New York. I forgot to mention that. That's exciting because that's the first time we're making a move like that. Yes?
That question is the gut flora, I think you called it?
Yes.
And one would think, if I understand that at all, that antibiotics would affect the gut flora.
So
and you look at antibiotics increase in use.
This is interesting. We were just in what we call a senior management team the other day, and we've got a grant that somebody's going to. They actually believe that antibiotics can shift the flora and force someone. Actually, could be the trigger that forces you down the path of beta cell death. So there's a big investigator who's actually evaluating that as we speak, and this grant just came to us for funding to ask us if we're willing to investigate whether antibiotics could potentially, now that can go either way. Antibiotics could be protective or it could be not protective. And so that was my question when the grant came in is, which way, this could go either way. Kids that got put on antibiotics, is their flora different, and do they protect them longer? Or those that got put on antibiotics, do they go down the path quicker? It's going to be hard science to tease out, I think. But, I think it's worth investing. So we're going to...
Aside from making interesting science.
Right. I think what we'd fundamentally want to do is try to get a real strong understanding of, in type 1, what's that intestinal flora look like? Is it different? And then I think what we'd want to do is identify the makeup of the flora and maybe how we could modulate it or manipulate it so it doesn't change, so that you end up committing to the disease. But it's complex, and we just started in that area. So really new science. Have no idea where that's going to go, but it's worth a shot. Other questions? Tired you all out? Hey, I had 60 slides. I got you down to 30. You're probably going, oh my God, could she really talk that long? I can. What was it?
Quick question on the sensors.
Yes.
Interesting, you're focused on those, and I know we have a glucose monitor for my son who basically couldn't get it calibrated, hated it, won't use it, so it sits in the drawer.
Oh, I know.
And I
hear
just wondered
that.
if is this kind of thing driving the sensor issue, or is just trying to improve technology, or is there
I think when we've been...
received well, I guess.
I think there's two issues with the sensors: the sensitivity of them, their accuracy as far as the regulators are concerned, and then the redundancy, safe mechanisms to keep them working accurately. We knew last year when we met with the FDA, they had concerns about sensors. We talked about whether we should really investigate what we should do in the sensor piece. I think Helmsley coming to the table and saying, you guys in, we're in, we need to do this. I think when we came in with the clinical guidance, it became very clear to us the sensor piece is what's really making them sit back and go, we're not sure you're ready to go to outpatient clinical trial. So I think the combination of hearing how people using these and what the issues are with them, what's going to hold us back to get the artificial pancreas, it's clear from our perspective that the regulators think the sensor's the problem. It's not as good as it should be. So I think us launching this initiative is the right thing to do. And I think that Helmsley Trust coming in, meeting us halfway, funding 50-50, it de-risks us So we're not completely putting all the skin in the game. They're going to put 50% in. It helps de-risk the project and what we get out of it. So we're going to make sure these companies that come to the table on this are serious, are really serious. So I think we've got to make sure that they feel there's an incentive to develop better sensors. So, anyone else? Yes?
It seems like a few years ago there was a lot of talk about genetic predisposition, but I haven't heard much about that lately. Can you tell me if that's going anywhere?
So we have the whole John Todd Wellcome Trust, who's been working very diligently on trying to identify particular genes that are involved. I think his work is really sound. We also work in genetics on the complication side as well. So we are absolutely funding there, and but you know, that takes time to get. What does it mean? You got to sort out the genes, which ones are important, which ones are not. Again, that's an area that it just takes time. And so John Todd has identified, I don't know what we're up to now. I mean, there's 50 genes that he's been looking at. He's whittling them down to certain genes, but to prove that takes time. You've got to use your natural history studies. You've got to map patients, and it's hard. But do I think they're making inroads? I definitely think they are. And we fund there, for sure. I mean, we have Wellcome Trust Partnership, and we fund ourselves in that area. And we just did the initiative with ADA on the genetics of neuropathy on the complication side. So we definitely are working in the genetics arena. Thank you.
Thank you.